Welcome back to Behind the Play. My name is Alex Adams, and today we're joined by Oren Weisfeld of Yahoo Sports, Sportsnet, .ca, Complex, The Guardian. I feel like I'm missing a bunch, but thanks so much, Oren, for taking the time and coming on.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, Alex. Really appreciate it. I've been eagerly anticipating this for a while. We've had plans to do it for a while, so I'm happy that we finally made it happen now.
I'm really excited for this as well, and I first want to ask a little bit about your career. When did you first think you might want to pursue a career in sports journalism?
Yeah, it was like halfway through my degree at Western. I studied media there, and I don't even know if it was then, but I needed like a hobby, so I started writing at the university paper, and the only thing I knew was sports, so I just like started covering some of the sports teams there. And but it was really just a hobby. I wanted to like meet new people and get out of my comfort zone a little bit. But then the more I did that, um, and then really I started writing at Raptors Republic, which is I think everyone knows a very popular Raptors blog. And that's where I really learned to write about sports. And I just had like the autonomy to write about whatever I wanted, kind of, and however often I wanted. And that was really when I started to be like, huh, maybe like sports journalism is actually a career path that I could try to throw myself at, as risky and silly as that might be. And that's kind of how it happened.
And with that, when you went to Raptors Republic, what was like, was there a moment when you were there that you felt, okay, this is the time I want to now make it full time in terms of I'm gonna put all my chips in the basket and go all in?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like, I think I had wanted to for a little while, but monetarily that wasn't an option. So like I worked restaurant jobs and did freelance writing on the side for a few years. And then the pandemic hit and I got CERB and it was the pandemic. So I'm like, okay, I have no other option but to write right now. Like I can't have a job outside of my house. So I basically started going full time during the pandemic.
Wow.
And the real like moment that pushed me to really want to pursue it in a way where I was like, I'm putting all my eggs into this basket, like this is what I want to do, was I guess towards the end of the pandemic, I guess. I went to like Victoria, BC in 2021 to cover the Canadian
Yep.
men's national team qualifying for the Olympics. It was like a last chance qualifying tournament. That was the year they had like RJ Barrett and Andrew Wiggins, and they lost to the Czech Republic in the
Oh, yeah.
semifinals.
Yeah. I
Raptors
remember that
Republic
game.
sent me over there, so I'm thankful to them for that. Um, and that was my first time interviewing pro athletes in person, and it was just such an exciting experience. Even though like they didn't allow crowds until like the last game, it was
Game.
still very pandemic-y, but it was just like watching international basketball up close, getting to interview some of those guys that I'd looked up to for a while. That's when I was like, oh yeah, I really want to do this.
And what was it like for you just to like who did you interview at that event and what was it like? Were you nervous?
Yeah, I was very nervous. I was a mess. I didn't have like nearly as many questions prepared like as I should have. So I would ask like one and then just not have any follow-ups ready. And like other reporters, like Grange was there
Yeah.
and he would just have like six questions ready to go. And I was just like, damn, like I gotta be more prepared. Um, and it was a mess. FIBA is a mess. Like they're not
Yeah.
very organized. So like when they lost, everyone was shocked, of course. I was shocked. I thought they were winning that tournament. So the players go back to the locker room. It's like a real, and then we're like, so who are we gonna talk to, you know? And so like none of the players want to talk to us. And then like Corey Joseph comes out and like gives us like each person gets in like maybe one question, and it's just like, yeah. So I don't even remember what your question was, but it
Yeah.
was
They're cool.
I was yeah, it was definitely like amateur hour for me. I learned a lot. Um I was pretty unprepared, but still talking to like Andrew Wiggins and RJ Barrett and like especially after wins. Like those guys, that was just really cool experience. And also like finding a niche in the industry was important because writing about the Raptors, there's like a million people who do that. So going there, I felt like that's when people started to like follow my work because they were
Mhm.
like, oh, this person's covering Team Canada, and there's not many people doing that.
Yeah, and I want to go off that a little bit because I know you've said that when you write, you look for specific stories, especially like with people and ideas that are maybe unrepresented in traditional media. What kind of stories do you look for when you're writing?
Um, I don't know, like it's a broad question. It's hard to answer because for a while I was covering like the last 2 seasons that I've been on the Raptors beat pretty heavily, and they're doing stuff that's like not traditionally covered in the media is like any idea you have that people haven't written about, like that's great. Like if you
Yeah.
can find a Raptors idea that no one is writing about at the moment on that beat, then you're happy because everything is being written about. It's really hard to find something like that. But outside of like the Raptors, speaking more broadly, I think I just try to find stories that like um are are about not just what's happening like on the field, but off it. So stories related to like the culture of sports, the politics, the business of sports. Like I find those things really fascinating when you can like find that intersection and take it, yeah, beyond like the X's and O's. That's the stuff that I really find interesting to write about.
Can you give us an example of a story that was along those lines?
Yeah, yeah, there's been a lot like in my career. I've always kind of dotted through them, but I've never had the opportunity because I've never had the opportunity to like write full time about this kind of stuff or even regularly because there's just not as much opportunity as there is to like cover the Raptors, for example.
Hmm.
And like, but lots like writing about Precious Achua and Christian Coloco, you naturally write a lot about and learn a lot about the history of, grassroots basketball in Africa and how those guys made it out and kind of like through those guys' stories, again, I just learned and spoke about how the infrastructure of basketball in Africa is developing and how it helped those guys, how that development helped those guys. I wrote a story about the Blue Jays and their connection to like Latin Canadian fans.
Hmm.
That was an example. I've written about like the NBA and their vaccine issues and stuff like that is an example. Like some more political athletes and ones guys who've spoken out against like America's government,
Yeah.
stuff like that. Those would be examples.
And for you, what would you say if you talk to a young journalist or even to me, if you could give me some advice, what advice would you give to journalists and especially in the sports media landscape in the industry? What advice would you give?
Do what you love because yeah, it's not linear and it can be unrewarding. So you never want to do something just because you think this is the path to make it, right? Because you might do that thing and be great at it, but still a job might never open in that specific thing. So it's like my only advice is like the only way you're going to stay sane in this thing and like because you do have to grind and you are going to be underpaid for the first however many years you do it is like if you're going to be underpaid and whatever, at least be doing something that you actually love and are really passionate about. Um, and that's the best advice I really think I can give because there are no tricks. There's no like secret formula. It's just about grinding and practicing. And like for me, I just wrote as much as I could and just like I was not a good writer naturally. I just wrote a lot and got better at it slowly. But I loved writing about sports, so that was like it wasn't the worst job in the world to
Yeah.
have.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's the only thing I can say.
Well, I want to move a little bit to some of the pieces that you've been working on it, and you've written a bit about the WNBA, which I want to touch on. And you had a really interesting piece. The WNBA's power lies with super teams, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. And you look about how the basically the landscape of the WNBA currently, and there's essentially two big super teams in the league. For you, how healthy and sustainable is the league right now?
I think it's in a great place, the W. I'm pretty excited for this season. I think there was just a thing that came out about like opening weekend uh record viewership.
Really?
And yeah, it feels very obvious that this season is kind of like a breaking off point in a way for the league, where I think it's really going to accelerate its growth. Because I mean, super teams, I don't think they're very sustainable, but they do, as much as us as fans might not like them, they do help leagues historically. Like when you look at the NBA, and I know people might be like, why are you always comparing the WNBA to the NBA? Well, they're comparable leagues. I hate to
Yeah,
tell you.
yeah, yeah.
So like LeBron in Cleveland versus Steph KD Warriors, like as much as we as fans were always like, I'm so sick of these teams meeting in the finals year after year. We know the regular, we know it's going to
Yeah.
happen. Those finals did more ratings than any finals previous since like the 90s Jordans. And that's just like what super teams are. They attract casual fans who aren't like big WNBA or NBA fans and bring them into the sport. So I think that's what these super teams in the W are going to do, is bring more casual fans into the sport. But in terms of like sustainability and like how much those teams have actually won recently, like since the Steph KD Warriors, we don't have that much history of, like, if you look at the NBA playoffs, it's actually like continuity that is winning, not super
Hmm.
teams. The
Hmm.
Lakers Nugget series was a perfect example of that. Um, but the W is in a really exciting phase for sure.
And with that, there was a WNBA preseason game in Toronto about 2 weeks ago with the Chicago Sky and the Minnesota Lynx, and obviously Bridget Carleton, who's on the Canadian women's basketball team, plays for the Lynx. And for you, I know you've written about how there's some murmurs that WNBA team might come to Toronto. How likely is that, and what would it mean for women's basketball in Canada if that were to happen?
Yeah, I think it's quite likely in the next few years. The W is definitely ready to expand. It's on the precipice of expanding, probably 2025. And, I don't know if Toronto will be one of the first teams to get that expansion. Like they'll probably be one or two off the bat, but they have to be in that mix. Like just logically, like we're a great sports market. And if the W wants to grow globally, they're very upfront about that. And if you want to grow globally and you want to expand, Toronto kind of hits both, you
Hmm.
know, th things really well. So I do think it is likely to happen in the next few years. Um, when we talk about like the growth of basketball in Canada, the men are actually like, it's very exciting for like the guys that are in the NBA right now, but like when you look at like college and stuff, the women are way ahead of the men in terms of like the next few years, who's going to be like making it to the WNBA versus the NBA. I think we have way more exciting women's basketball prospects in
Wow.
Canada. When you look at like Aaliyah Edwards,
Hmm.
Shy Day Wilson, um, there's a ton. There's like, I mean, the girl just committed to Duke, Toby Fournier, who's a
Yeah.
dunker.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
Cassandra Prosper, who's the sister of Olivier Maxence Prosper. She's like a national team member. She's like 16, playing for the senior women's team. So we have a lot of really exciting prospects. So a WNBA team would be great because, I mean, hopefully some of them would be able to play in Toronto. That would be really exciting to have a homegrown talent here. But I mean, I, there's I've written a lot about like this, and at
Hmm.
Complex I had a big story about what these things could do for women's basketball. But like representation is a big thing. Like we already have some of these women now making it to the WNBA who girls in Canada can look up to, but to have a team where they could go to games regularly and just like see that product up front, I think that's how you get inspired to play the game and stick with it and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it would definitely help the growth of the game.
I have a kind of interesting theoretical question for you because Canada just got a men's domestic basketball league in the CBL, sorry. And for you, what would be more important for the game? And hopefully we get both, just for the record. But to have what would be more important, a women's domestic league like the CEBL or a WNBA team in Canada, just for the growth of the game?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's hard for me to say which one would be more important because they would help in different ways. But I do think we're way closer to a WNBA team. So, like, realistically, that is the one I would be targeting
Hmm.
first. I think a domestic league, we do have the framework of the CBL that is a great framework for a women's league to go off of. But I think those leagues are more for, it's you're not gonna get like Bridget Carlton playing in that league.
Yeah.
She's gonna play in Spain in her off season if she wants to. Like, it's going to be a lower level of talent, and that's great for like women who say go to college and then
Want to keep
go
playing.
play overseas and then are like, okay, can I really stay in this basketball thing? And then they transfer jobs because it's not a safe, like, it's just not a safe career. Whereas if we had a domestic league, which I've seen in the CBL with tons of people I know, is like now they came back to Toronto and like or Canada, and they're continuing to play basketball and make a living doing it, but they don't have any real aspirations to go to the NBA,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
just like
Hmm.
it's just a lower tier league.
Yeah.
So I think it would be big for more jobs in the industry, but it wouldn't attract the Kia nurses of the world.
Yeah.
And so in that way, I don't know, like a WNBA team would be pretty cool as well.
Yeah. And I want to ask before I go to the Raptors, because you mentioned briefly about Bridget Carlton having to go over to Spain to make ends meet, alongside her playing obviously for the Minnesota Lynx. And you had a piece about Brianna Stewart and how she has to go, who's like won the MVP and the WNBA, one of the best players in the league, and how she has to go overseas. How long will it be in your mind until the NBA pays its players enough where they don't have to go overseas to make a living, in your mind?
Not long. And the responsibility also falls on corporate sponsors because you look at NBA players, a lot of their income comes from shoe deals and stuff like that. Like, it's not only coming from the NBA. So if corporate, like, you know, uh Candace Parker is a good example of like she doesn't play overseas anymore because she has this media gig with Turner where she covers the NBA in her off season. So and Brianna Stewart has the signature shoe now with Puma. So like if more and more of that stuff starts happening, they'll be able to supplement their incomes in other ways besides going overseas.
Hmm.
Um, but in terms of the average WNBA player, I still think for the next few years they'll be going over there, but I don't think it'll be that long before salaries are good enough in the W. And the league will probably continue to extend its season. Like, this is a 40 game season, it's bigger than last season.
Yeah,
So as the league grows, I just think,
it
yeah,
makes.
that'll be more of a viable option for a lot of women.
Hmm. And now I want to go a little bit to the NBA, and I have a little fun question for you before we go to the Raptors. If you were the NBA commissioner for one day, what rule would you change?
It's a good one. Okay. I would allow like 5 seconds in the key
Wow.
or take away the three in the key rule
Huh.
because
A defensive?
defenses have no shot in the modern NBA, and I want to give them help. And like hand checking is like that's a theoretical. I think that would change the game too much
Yeah.
if you allowed hand checking. But if you allow bigs to stay stationed in the paint, it would just completely change the game because um everything would change. Like, you just wouldn't be able to collapse a defense as easily and then spray it out to three and then shoot a million threes.
Yeah.
The structure would just change if you could station a big guy in the paint for longer. It would just help defenses so much. So I think that's because I've written a lot about like how the offense has just gone too far, and I really like reached out to people about like how are ideas to fix this. Hand checking is the biggest one. It sounds great to say the refs should just let more physicality go, which they do
Right.
in the playoffs, but that's hard to enforce and like make a permanent thing. So I'll say 5 in the key.
That's interesting. Wait, so so they could stay in the key. So you're not getting rid of it like FIBA. You're just having it at 5 seconds.
Right. Or maybe I would get rid of it if 5 didn't make enough of a difference, because I already think threes don't get called nearly, like
Yeah.
guys are stationed there way more than 3 seconds. So maybe it wouldn't make enough of a difference and we'd have to just go to FIBA. Bigs can stay in the paint as long as they want, but something around that rule. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's what I like about FIBA is just the no defensive 3 seconds because it makes it the defenses is just so much it feels like you're playing more on the park than it does like on 2K a little bit, if that makes sense. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I want to ask a little bit about the Raptors. Obviously, you covered them day in and day out, and looking back at last year quickly, what do you think went wrong for the Raptors last year? Was it coaching? Was it personnel? Was it management? I feel it's probably all of the above. But what do you think went wrong last year for the Raptors?
Yeah. It's hard to say in like a sentence. But
It's okay. You can take notes.
I, yeah, side more towards there is a lot of talent on this team. So I guess I side towards the front office more. Not
Okay.
like that everything was Nick Nurse's fault, because it wasn't. He's a good coach, but I do side towards like there is a lot of talent on this team and people tend to forget that because last season looked as bad as it did. But it's on the players and the coaching staff to like figure out how that talent looks on a daily basis and to establish a hierarchy and role definition. Those were the things that I felt were missing from the Raptors last season. It's like there's a lot of good players, but all of them think they're the best, or all of them
Yeah.
think they should be the number one option. And it's like it's on the coaches to like establish that hierarchy, but it's also on the players to accept it. And I don't think we had nearly enough humility in that locker room, um, from the players half to actually sacrifice and to like to do what was best for the team and all that stuff. So my blame, it's not a perfect roster by any means. There are still things that have to happen to take it to like a champion level roster. But you're telling me that the Miami Heat's roster is significantly better than the Raptors? Like, no.
No, no. Jimmy
It's
Butler's
coaching,
better.
it's role definition. Exactly. They have a better superstar for sure, and that's hugely important when it comes to taking the next step to getting to like a finals. But just for like regular season stuff, you don't need that. Like Siakam is a great regular season star. You
Yeah.
need buy-in around him and depth around him and figuring out how to put players who are limited in roles where they can excel and not show their limitations. So my blame falls on the players and the coaching staff more than the front office. That's how I see it. That doesn't mean a coach can just come in and fix everything, because there seems like something in the mix up of the players isn't right. And I
Hmm.
think you have to make some real changes in terms of personnel to make it make more sense in terms of the hierarchy and everything like that.
And with that, of course, Nick Nurse got fired. And so for you, I know that they've had a big net in terms of who they've been looking at. For you, out of the leading candidates that seem to be rumored to the job, who would be your preferred choice to be the next coach of the Toronto Raptors?
Yeah, I think I'll just start off by saying that like coaching is changing in the league, and I think what you need more than X's and O's. That stuff's important, but I think coaches can learn that stuff and get better at it. And I think the biggest thing you need is like a people's person, like someone who connects to players, who can get them to buy into certain roles and sacrifice, and who guys want to play for, and just like a really like enthusiastic, like upbeat person who people like. Like that is to me the biggest thing, because a coach's job has become more about managing like multi-million dollar people's personalities than it has about like Nick is a great X's and O's coach. Did it matter last season? No, because he didn't have buy-in from the players. Like they weren't willing or able to execute what he was doing. So it didn't matter how smart of a basketball person he is. What mattered was how well did he connect to players, and I think the answer was pretty obviously not well.
Mm-hmm.
especially young players, because the
Okay.
league is getting younger. Scottie Barnes walks into the league with a $10 million a year contract. How do you get that guy to be a fourth option?
Yeah.
Nick couldn't do it, but like that's the hard part, and that's where like the coach I want is the guy who like connects to people. Um, on top of obviously putting them in roles to succeed. The name that I like the most is probably Sergio Scariolo,
Oh
the
wow. Okay. Yeah.
just because like everywhere he's gone, he's had an insane amount of success. So it's like I want to bet on that guy and see if he can have that success in the NBA. Like this is a guy that just like somehow wins EuroLeague with Spain every year and like won an
FIBA.
Olympics with Spain. And like these are not insanely talented rosters. And I watched a lot of that Spanish team um this last summer at Eurobasket when they won. You know, that was the team with Juancho and his
Yeah.
brother. And they played so hard and they played on such a string. They were so connected. And this is like they're like, yeah, those guys have played together before, but like that's a short training camp into competition. It's not like this is an NBA team where like they're
Yeah.
together every day. So Sergio, I don't know about him personally, but just the track record I think is really impressive.
Hmm.
And I think there's something to a guy that comes from outside the NBA, and he's not going to put up with the bull. Can I swear?
Yeah, you can. You can.
The
It's fine.
bullshit of like NBA drama, like
Mm,
I need this, I need this. Like Sergio's coming from Spain. He's like, nah, you're getting this, and everyone's getting this. I think there's something healthy to like outside NBA personality, not like subscribing to all these beliefs that we hold, like superstar treatment. Of course, like these things are going to happen regardless, but a little less of it. And Monty Williams is the other guy who I'd like.
With that, my question is just that you mentioned that you want a people's person that gets the players, but if Scario, I can't say his name, uh, Sergio comes in and is just like very upfront, will that push off players like maybe a Scottie Barnes who's like, well, don't tell me what to do? Like, is that something you worry about? Because like I think about Monty Williams as well, and I think he sounds like a great coach, but there's that it sounds as though he never talked to DeAndre Ayton all last summer, and they had all that, which didn't seem like that's you want your coach to be communicative,
Yeah.
sorry, with the players. So I find it really interesting on that point.
Yeah, I think though both of those coaches, like almost all their players love playing with them. DeAndre Ayton is definitely the exception. Him and Monty did not get along, but like that just depends
Yeah.
where do you fall on that. Do you blame
No,
Ayton
and
or Monty?
yeah, I don't think it's all Monty Williams' fault on that one.
Yeah,
I just mean you'd think he'd send a text and be like,
you're
hey,
right.
yeah,
You're
like
right.
right.
You're right.
If that makes any sense. So I
Yeah.
definitely agree on that.
No, I think there's like that's a bit of a red flag. Everyone has their imperfections. Like Becky Hammon, she looked like a perfect candidate, and then this stuff comes out with Derek Hamby and like her pregnancy, and Becky just got suspended for a couple games. So
Yeah.
everyone has their issues. Sergio, like I don't mean to say he's gonna like just not listen to players. I think he is I think he does connect with players, and I don't think he would come in like so hot
Yeah.
like I'm saying. I just think he has like fundamentally in his basketball brain, it comes from a different place than
Mhm.
American basketball culture. It
Yeah.
comes from European basketball culture, and there's certain things there that I think are actually healthy and could be healthy in an NBA locker room.
Hmm.
But yeah, with either of these guys, I can't actually say how well they're going to connect to the Raptors players. That is the job of Masai.
Yeah, and with that, perfect segue because I wanted to ask you about him and Bobby and the management group because they always talk about championships or bust and kind of it doesn't matter, what was it playing for what, right? And then they did it this year. But what is the path for this team to become elite again? Like do they just need a new coach and a couple tweaks? Like I don't see it that way, but what do you think is the path for this team to become elite?
Like championship contenders elite.
Yeah, like I'm not saying next year, obviously. I think that'd be pretty going out on a
Yeah.
limb, but like what's like do they need to rebuild? Do they need to retool? Like what's their way of becoming kind of a really, really good team again?
Yeah. I think I think they certainly need a retool in that last year was just proof that this mix of on-court and off-court personalities is not that clean. Like the Scottie, Pascal, Pirtle front court is not a clean front court. There's no shooting. It can probably work if you have in your backcourt two great shooters. So either you're gonna have to change the front court or the backcourt. Like change has to come, I think for sure. I think, it's a combination of things. Development has to come from Scotty and Precious. And then you have to hit around the edges. Like these things are really important, but like Otto Porter, for example, like that
Yeah.
was a really important missed opportunity. But however, if the Raptors hit on the 13th pick and they hit on their mid-level exception, like that's all of a sudden a pretty deep team, right? If you
Hmm.
add two more guys, and let's just say they ran it back. Like I don't expect them to, but I'm just saying like there are ways where you can quickly add depth, but you got to hit, and it's not easy to hit on the 13th pick or $10 million. But yeah, I again, I believe in the front office, but that's kind of their way to rebuild some of the stuff. But once you do that, once you rebuild guys' values, once you rebuild the depth, then I think this team will have to make one of those consolidation trades for them to take that step to championship contenders. And that's like the reason I'm not so worried about the Raptors, I think, is because if you look at a team like Cleveland, who everyone
Hmm.
is very excited about their future,
Yeah.
well, could the Raptors not have made the same deal for Donovan Mitchell, leveraged their whole future, got Donovan Mitchell and being right where they are? They could have. They didn't want to do it for that player, but they could have. The
Yeah.
Raptors have a lot of picks. Again, if they rebuild some of the value on the roster, I think eventually they'll have to go after a superstar if they ever want to reach like championship contention. But I think the first step in that process is just like rebuilding guys' values by having a team out there that makes sense.
And with that, there's been some rumors about Portland and the third overall pick and maybe being linked to Siakam or OG Anunoby. What do you make of that? And in my mind, I think that'd be a smart thing to do. Obviously, depends what else, if it's just straight up or whatever. But what do
Yeah,
you make of that rumor? And would you entertain that if you're the Raptors?
I would. I think again, this team needs a retool, and the most obvious way to do that is trading either OG or Pascal because they're the two guys with the most value on the team other than Scotty. So I would be open to trading one of those guys, but you have to trade those guys for something exciting. You can't just trade them for like future picks and like
Yeah.
sell a fan base on that. So to me, Scoot Henderson is very exciting. If he's there at 3, I would be excited to do some sort of framework with Portland. The other guy is Jaylen Brown.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
think Boston and him clearly have some clash. So if he is available for one of those wings, that's another guy I would be very excited to bring in and like there all of a sudden you have like an offensive engine who you can play through a little bit more. I think like let's just say OG for Jaylen, right? Like the Raptors defense obviously drops off there, but their offense makes a whole lot more sense, I think, just in terms
Mhm.
of the amount of guys who can take it off the dribble and create something for you. So those are the type of frameworks that would make me excited as a Raptors fan. Um, or like one of these, or you just wait until one of these superstars gets upset and trade for them, like you know, Carl Anthony Towns. I don't think he's a guy I really want to put all my
No,
chips in for,
I don't.
but I'm just saying like he's an example of a guy who's probably going to be on the market. Trey Young,
Yeah.
like that's a guy who I actually would be behind. I
Would you
like Trey Young.
would you do a Siakam for Trey Young straight up? Like I
Um, probably,
yeah.
probably. You would
I
have to trade Fred in that situation, I think, but
yeah. Yeah.
Trey is a lot younger than Siakam. That's probably the biggest thing, right? Is like Trey is like 22 or something. Siakam's like 28, 29. So yeah, probably. But just like yeah, those are kind of the things that you got to
Hmm.
watch for.
No, for
Embiid
sure.
is the guy I really want. Give it another year. He's gonna want out of there.
Yeah. When Harden goes to Houston and then he's
Yeah.
just stuck. Yeah, no, that he might even do it this summer, honestly. Like if Houston, if they or if James Harden leaves, like
Yep.
I don't know why he'd stay. No offense to
Yeah.
Tyrese Maxey, but yeah, yeah.
Maxey's another guy I've thought about. OG for Maxey is another framework that I think
Wow,
makes sense. If Harden
that's
stays, they need a wing. They
that's
kind
really
of like
interesting.
couldn't even start Maxey this season because they want like Melton or PJ on the floor. So
That makes a
that's
lot of
something that would
sense.
make me excited too.
Yeah, I think the thing this Raptors team hasn't had, even with DeMar and Kyle, was that kind of explosive guard, right? That can really take you off the dribble, right? Like I think of Scoot Henderson, that's basically what the kind of player he is. Obviously, I'm not saying he's exactly like Tyrese Maxey, but that kind of player would be really exciting, especially with Scottie on the wing. Like you already have a wing, so you don't necessarily need more. I mean, obviously more the merrier, but I want to ask you quickly because the Raptors do have three free agents that hopefully, or I'm sure some of them will probably be re-signed, but what are the chances that like what what is most likely to happen with Fred VanVleet, Jakob Poeltl, and Gary Trent? Like, is it any way that all three of them come back? What do you think is the most likely outcome?
I think the most likely outcome is Fred and Pirtle come back and Gary does not.
Yeah.
Um, that's just me like reading the tea leaves and educated guess. I think Pirtle, obviously they traded for him. They're obviously going to re-sign him. Fred, it's just unless you have a replacement, there's just no way you can get rid of Fred. He's your only point guard. He's
Hmm.
immensely important to the team. And I think the biggest thing with Gary, if I know anything about the front office, it's that they probably just haven't seen enough development for him from him over the couple of years he's been here, 2.5 seasons. Like that's what they're looking for, and that's what they pay guys to do is to develop.
No,
And if you look at the Gary who came to Toronto versus the Gary last season, like it's not that different of a player.
no.
Um, so I don't think Gary will be back. Maybe they'll lose him for nothing. Maybe they'll sign and trade him, but
Do you
I
think he
just don't. I don't see it. And also, he would be coming off the bench, so I don't even know if he would want to come back.
Do you think he picks up the option? Because I don't know if he's going to be able to make maybe on a long-term deal, but he's not going to be making 18 million next year, is he? Like I just or whatever his it's like in the teens. Like I don't see him making that kind of money next year.
Yeah, it's possible. And I think that would be good for the Raptors, to be frank. Like, if he picks up the option, then they can actually trade him for something or just bring him off the bench and there's nothing he can really say about it because he's on the final year of the deal and whatever. So, um, but I think he won't just because he probably knows that if he plays somewhere else, even if he goes on a 1 year deal elsewhere,
He
somewhere
can
he knows he can start, he
yeah.
can boost his value that way rather than playing off the bench for the Raptors.
And I want to ask you about Scottie Barnes because I think for most Raptors fans, probably the most disappointing part of the year was just Scottie Barnes. Not that he had a terrible year, but he didn't really feel as though he improved tremendously or even at all in some ways. What does he need to improve on going into next season, and where do you see his ceiling at right now as we speak?
I think his ceiling is still very high. I'm very excited about him still. I know how fans are, it's natural, but like the expectations were always too lofty and unrealistic. Guys on the Raptors, just historically, like they're asked to like come along slowly offensively. Like they're not just all of a sudden going to be given some huge offensive load and asked to carry it. So I think Scotty is every season they're going to give him a little bit more, and that's all you can expect from him is like a little bit more. I think he made big strides defensively this season.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of what he has to work on, it's somewhat complicated based on who is going to be on the team next season, right? Like if he's the point guard and Fred's not back, then I'll say his ball handling. That's like a huge thing. Like Scotty cannot be a full-time point guard right now, I don't think, because he can't he can't deal with pressure of smaller guards. If Pascal is there next year, Scotty probably has to work on his outside shot,
Yeah.
right? So it really depends on like who is back. But to me, the biggest thing is like Scotty is like immensely talented it's about like learning those professional habits to do that every night and like to be a consistent player every night. Because to me, it's not like skill is not his issue as
Yeah.
much as like I don't want to like speculate about anything. It's just like as much as like his you see it in fourth quarters. You see him get aggressive,
Yeah.
right? And like take the game into his hands. Like
Yeah, he had
he
some.
needs to have some of that stuff from the beginning of the game, 82 games in a season. Even if he doesn't improve at all his skills, if he did that, he would just be like a phenomenal player.
Yeah. Yeah, because it was something crazy where his stats just went crazy in the fourth quarter this year. I forget. I don't have a specific stat off the top of
Yeah.
my head, but he was definitely way better, more efficient, would score at a higher rate and everything. Now I want to transition a little bit to the NBA playoffs, and it's been a pretty wild playoffs to be honest. Obviously, with the Miami Heat probably making it to the finals as an 8 seed, it's only been ever done once before. What have you thought of the playoffs so far, and do you enjoy the parity that it seems to be that there seems to be in the league currently?
Yeah, I do. I've been enjoying this so much. Like these playoff games, I've been watching a lot every night pretty much. There was a streak there. I was watching 2 games a night for like a week.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I really enjoy definitely the parity. It's just been great. It's impossible to predict, which is not something you usually say about the NBA. And that just makes it so exciting because, yeah, you just don't know how these series are going to play out. Personally, in terms of my fandom, it's gone about as well as it could have with the Lakers and Celtics both losing. Hopefully the
Well,
Celtics. Like
hopefully.
I I just like seeing guys who have been at it for a while get their first ring. That's
Mm,
like to me so much more rewarding than seeing like when KD and Steph when KD and the Warriors won their second ring together, they legit did not celebrate.
yeah.
They were just like, "Yep, we knew this was coming. We're the best team ever." Like,
Yeah.
so but compare that to like LeBron getting one in Cleveland or like whatever.
The Raptors
So
even.
I'm really excited to see either Jimmy or Jokic get their first ring. And obviously Jamal Murray, rooting interest there for Team Canada. So I would just be happy with either of those teams winning. And yeah, I've been really enjoying this.
And with that, do you have a finals prediction? If let's presume for this podcast that the Nuggets play the Heat, who do you like in that series? And I feel as though it's like definitely the two best teams in the playoffs. So I'm really excited. Like I feel the matchups and everything will be really fun.
Same. I've been going back and forth because I don't know, it's a hard one to predict. Like, you don't want to pick against the Heat. Like, they've just proven it wrong every time. Of course, like, just like the Celtics had more talent, I think the Nuggets have more talent than the Heat. But yeah, it's like there's something just like silly about picking against the Heat at this point. Still, I would pick the Nuggets. I've been on the Nuggets all season, so I kind of probably it just comes from a bias of like
Yeah.
I'm not gonna jump off the bandwagon now, but I've been saying it all season that they're the best team in the league, or at least in the West. I was shocked everyone picked Phoenix to win that series. That
Me
never made any
too.
sense to
They
me.
look Phoenix looked so bad in that first round too. It wasn't even like if they looked gangbusters maybe, but they didn't look
Yeah.
good against the Clippers.
No, I thought the Clippers might win that thing. It's like it depends what you believe in, and I believe a lot in like the intangibles and like continuity and these chemistry things. And a lot of basketball fans just think like talent trumps all, and I understood that with the KD trade, but to me it was never they were never gonna put a team together in like 10 days or 10 games that KD played and then win in the playoffs. So the Nuggets are just and what happened with the Lakers was very predictable too. Like those guards were scoring. They were doing all the scoring for the Lakers, and LeBron was just basically being a role player for most of the playoffs, getting guys like he was just like a playmaker and Reeves and
Reeves.
like what's his name? D'Angelo Russell. Those guys were like scoring somehow it was working. But once you get the Nuggets guards, those guys are big physical guys. There was no chance D'Angelo Russell was gonna like do the same thing against them. So
Yeah.
that didn't like catch me by surprise at all. In terms of the finals, I think the teams play similarly. Like they play through their bigs a lot. They both love those like high posts, like Duncan Robinson would cut baseline, and like Bam
Hmm.
makes the same passes Jokic, makes.
Yeah,
Not he's not as good, but they
he's
play
a
a
good
lot in
passer.
similar ways. Yeah.
Yeah,
So, but I will just go with, I think Jokic is the best player in that series.
I was gonna ask
So
you.
I'll go with him, but it would not surprise me if Bam locks him down to an extent and Jimmy averages 35 and the Heat win.
I feel, and maybe this is just me, but I feel the key to that series is Jamal Murray. Like, it's not that I don't trust him, but I think if Jamal Murray has a pretty big series, then I find it hard to believe that the Heat win that series. But if they're able to contain him, maybe play Jimmy Butler on him, which would be interesting because he's so good
True.
defensively. That would be really. I think he's kind of the swing man in terms of who wins that series because I think you know what you get from Jokic and
Mhm.
Jimmy. Bam's good, but he's not going to change the outcome of a lot of these games. So I just think if we get 32, 35 a night from Jamal Murray, it's going to be tough.
That's a good point because you're right. Jimmy's going to guard him when it matters most. And yeah, that's a hard guy to score on, especially the way Jamal likes to score. So, like, Jamal likes to bully guys, and you can't bully Jimmy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a good point. Um, I'll be curious too, like, how the Heat defend Jokic, because we've
Hmm.
seen a lot not putting your big on him, like putting,
Yeah, with Anthony Davis.
yeah, they could even put like a guy like Kevin Love on him and let Bam rove. But the Nuggets can put lineups out there that are just five shooters. So like where is Bam roving off of? If they take like Bruce Brown off the floor, who's honestly an okay shooter, and then they just go like five of their best shooters, the Nuggets have the best combination to me of size plus shooting, and that's why I like them the most. Like they just have it in spades. Most teams, when they get big, you don't get like the guard skills, but the Nuggets have like so much shooting across that roster, it's insane. So yeah, I like the Nuggets.
Yeah. No, me too. Do you have if you had to pick games, do you think it's a game seven? Are we gonna
I
get
hope
another?
so, man. I do. I think 6 or 7. Like I think that's gonna be a really competitive series, and I really hope we get a good one.
Yeah, no, I'd be shocked it's not a very close series unless there's a catastrophic injury to
Yeah.
one of the
Kyle's
best.
gonna have one game. Kyle Lowry will win one game for the Heat in the
Yeah.
play in the finals. You just know it.
Yeah, no. If he I'd be really happy just for him. I think I'm a big Jokic guy, so and I just never really like the Heat. So but I think if Kyle were to win a ring, that'd be really interesting and maybe supplant him as a Hall of Famer, which would be kind of an interesting
Yeah.
thing. Although he hasn't been as big, obviously, with this team. Um, and now before I let you go, because you talked about at the beginning how you started with Canada basketball, I think it's good to end off with it. Obviously, the men's team has the FIBA World Cup this summer. It's a way for them to qualify for the Olympics as well. They have a pretty tough group, honestly, with France and Latvia in their opening round group. What do you make of the team kind of going into this summer, and who do you think will show up? Because it's always different players every year.
No, yeah, that's the question. Is who will show up. I think Jamal going to the finals makes him much less likely.
Okay.
It's just such a short turnaround. Mid-June is when the finals will end, to early August is when they'll have training camp. Like a month and a half is tough for a guy coming off an ACL tear. So I wouldn't count on Jamal being there. I would count on SJ though. RJ will be there. Nikhil will be there. Dwight Powell. Um, and Kelly Olynyk, like that's a really good base to start from, I think. So I'm not too worried about them coming out of the group. Like they'll beat Latvia. I feel
Okay.
strongly about that. The thing is they'll have to either beat France or Spain to come out of the quarterfinals because Spain is in their like opposing group.
Yeah.
So that will be tough. Um, that will be tough because those teams just have played together for so many years and they know the FIBA game a lot better. But like, look, if Shea is gonna play at the level he played at last summer and in the NBA this season, it's really hard to pick against that. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. No.
yeah. So I'm pretty I'm excited for this summer for sure. It should be a good one.
Do you worry that they don't have enough bigs? Because I think of, especially in the FIBA game, we alluded to it. There's no defensive 3 seconds. And it felt as though in that Czech game 2 years ago, they didn't really have a big. Like Dwight Powell's obviously a good player, but do you think they need a bit more front court help for them to be successful in the FIBA game?
Kind of like for them to really win it all. I think rebounding is really the thing. Like defense, I think they're fine, like in terms of their size, but like rebounding is where I worry. And that's where Andrew Wiggins would be nice because he's a great rebounder for a wing, but he's not going to play this summer. He might play at the Olympics, so that would be nice. But yeah, like Zach Edey is like the one traditional big on the roster, but like I don't know if he's ready for that challenge yet. And then, like you said, after Dwight Powell falls off, it would be nice if they could get like a Chris Boucher, a Brandon Clark.
Brandon
He's
Clark's,
injured, but
yeah,
even a guy like Tristan Thompson, like not Tristan Thompson, but like in that mold of player.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Do
but
you
I don't
do
know
you
if they will.
Do you think guys like, because they have a bunch of young guys that have broken into the league in the past year or two with like a Ben Matherin, Nemhard, um, do you think those kind of players might show up for Canada even though they weren't on like the court? Was it 14 or 12? I forget that was made a
Yeah.
couple years ago.
Yeah, like they've been asked about this and they said that like when that 12 player core was made, those guys weren't in the league, so they didn't really have an opportunity to. So I think there's certainly a chance, although the pay like Sharp is not going to play,
Yeah.
and the Pacers guys who you just mentioned, like Randy Carlisle had a weird quote about letting his players play for Team Canada, where he was like, "It can be a great opportunity, but if you're not getting any playing time, then how much are you really learning?"
Yeah.
So like that was like that kind of caught me off guard and like okay,
Okay.
maybe they don't want their guys going. I know I know for sure Matherin really wants to. I think Nemhard does too. So
Nemhard played for,
yeah.
he played here. I actually saw him like, what
Yep.
was it, 5 years ago or something when he played in Ottawa. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah, he's played for Nick Nurse. So I don't know. It's really hard to say because it would be somewhat surprising to me if they chose those guys this summer over like the Scrub Brothers or Cassius Robertson, who've like
Yeah.
helped build the program and helped them qualify for these games. Um, but at the same time, you probably should just go with skill over
Yeah.
everything else.
Yeah.
But Nick Nurse is a bit of a stubborn guy. I think he has a lot of power over there.
Yeah.
So I think it's the same with like the Andrew Wiggins situation where Wiggins is like, I'll play Olympics, but not anything else. I think Nurse would be like, no, you're not getting away with that.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, we'll see though.
Okay.
I don't know.
What about, I'm thinking of Dylan Brooks because he's obviously much maligned. And I know you've written about him, but what are the chances? I know he's a free agent, but he'd probably have a contract by then. What are the chances he'd play for Canada? Because he hasn't played since that core was made, but he has played for
Right.
Canada before.
He told me straight up that if he has a contract by then, he'll play.
Oh, wow.
Um, Obviously the Memphis situation makes it like less likely he'll have a contract on day one of free agency, but still, like
I'm
it's
sure he'll.
basically a month to before training camp starts. I think there will be real interest with Dylan Brooks. I think he's a really good NBA player. A lot of teams want him. Memphis was stupid for what they did. Um, so I think there's a good shot he's there. But like honestly, his
Yeah.
importance is not. I think like you have Lou Dort on the roster for sure.
Yeah.
I think how much can those guys play together, you know? So
Yeah.
I'm not like Dylan Brooks is the be all end all.
Hmm. I guess, okay, before I let you go, what if you had to guess right now, who's the starting lineup for Canada at the FIBA World Cup?
Okay. Yeah, I think it's I think it's SGA, for sure RJ Barrett, for sure Dwight Powell, and for sure Kelly Olynyk. The only guy that's maybe is like the two guard, it is a little harder to say. I would go with Nikhil because those guys, they're cousins. They legit
Yeah.
know how to play
Yeah.
together as a backcourt. They looked good doing it last summer. But like a Dort or a Brooks could definitely earn that spot, I would think, in the right matchup. Um, so yeah, who knows?
Well, Oren, thanks so much for taking the time and coming on. I really appreciate it. I just wanted to give you the floor. Is there anything you're working on going forward that people should keep their eyes out for?
Nothing that like I really want to announce right now, but just gonna be doing some NBA, some WNBA, maybe some other, definitely a lot of Canada basketball once
Awesome.
July Global Jam hits.
Yep.
The the draft, we'll try to do some stuff around Canadians in the draft, and yeah, when the team goes to the Worlds, I'll be covering that in some capacity. So
Are you
nothing
going to
really
the
to plug.
Worlds?
I wish, no.
Oh, okay.
I
That'd be
tried,
sick.
trust me, but no one wants to send me over there.
Yeah, it's only
But I'll
Grange.
probably be like, yeah, yeah. Yeah, not many people it sounds like will be going. But I'll probably be writing from here or something. But yeah, you can follow me at Twitter at Oren Weisfeld to if you want to keep up with that stuff.
Well, thank you so much, Oren. I really had a great time, and I really appreciate you taking the time and coming on the podcast.
No, me too. I had a nice time, and thanks for having me. Congrats on the growth of the podcast. I've seen all the guests you've been getting and the conversations you've been having. So keep up the great work. It looks like it's going well for you these days. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks so much. I really appreciate it, and that means a lot. And yeah, for listeners, there's definitely more people on the horizon and more episodes coming out. So stay tuned, and yeah, thank you so much.